You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm pleased to be here today with the founder and CEO of Affable. And as part of his self-introduction, I'd love to have Nisarg explain what the origin story was to Affable, which is an affiliate discovery and management platform. Excuse me, an influencer discovery and management platform.
Hey, thanks a lot, Kevin, for having me here. I'm super excited to talk about influencer marketing, what we do at Affable and what the future holds for the influencer marketing space. Origin story, it's funny because a lot of people ask me if I am an influencer, and funnily, I am not. I have nothing to do with being an influencer myself. Back in 2017, me and my co-founder Swayam were brainstorming on what the future of commerce looks like. And this is the time and age where a lot of brands were predominantly spending their money on search-based commerce. So Google ads, Amazon ads, you search products and buy something. And we had a hypothesis that the future is going to be social commerce. And this is back in 2017 when two of us, and we both are engineers, so we sat together and said, hey, if the future of social commerce is to exist the way we think, then what are the tools and capabilities that brands would need to drive social commerce? And the biggest elephant in the room was, how do you manage these micro influencers that can actually help you drive social commerce? But the volume is so much, and unlike a programmatic ad, you have to manage every single one of them. So that was the origin story of the idea. Is like, okay, hey, if brands are going to spend so much of their time and resource on micro influencers, then how can we make it easy for these brands to find, manage, measure, pay the influencers and make it accessible for any brand in any part of the world?
Great. Well, that's a great origin story. And so your vision has to a great extent happened. While search and programmatic and traditional social media continue to be foundational for many brands, both commerce brands and non-commerce brands, influencers are a great way to break through the clutter, particularly if you're chatting with an audience that would typically be running an ad blocker. Because if you're running an ad blocker, you're never going to reach those people the regular way. So, I mean, a lot of people think about influencers as being really active in the fashion category. But I'm guessing that you've probably seen a bunch of categories or industries where influencers are super powerful that are not obvious to the marketer, right? So I'd love to hear if there are any interesting industries where surprisingly influencer marketing can be very powerful.
Yeah, and you're right that influencer marketing is the most prominent in B2C, fashion, lifestyle, consumer goods industry. We have also seen influencer marketing to be very effective in two surprising categories. One is the whole mobile app industry. It's not very obvious that influencers will be able to drive installs for mobile apps, and the customer acquisition cost for a mobile app developer company is very high now because of the competition in the space. And influencers are surprisingly able to drive thousands of installs if you pick the right niche. And the second surprising space is the whole B2B world. You are an influencer for all practical purposes for anyone in the MarTech and the marketing industry and advertising industry. Similarly, there are people in the ecosystem who talk a lot about, let's say, for example, semiconductors, or who talk a lot about cybersecurity, who talk a lot about just general B2B categories, finance, health, etc., where the brands who are in the space would want to partner with. And that's something we've seen evolve quite a bit as well now.
Absolutely. And I know you built the platform initially as to handle sort of micro influencers and maybe, from to mid influencers, or the smaller third of the influencer marketing stack. But I'm curious if you've gotten interesting success stories about either micro-influencers who grew or just influencers that were perhaps bigger than expected and had an outsized impact for the brands who were engaging with them?
We've seen many brands benefit more than what the brand thought. So if you think about it, when a brand is working with an influencer, they go out and set out a strategy. They have certain expectation. We have seen brands, and without naming a specific brand, we've seen brands get $60,000 to $70,000 worth of return after spending $500. Now that's an outsized impact in terms of an ROI. And to be fair, it is not repeatable every single time. When a brand is able to find a unicorn influencer in that sense for a specific language and the post goes viral, that's where the brand has kind of done gold. And we keep advising brands for this reason to keep experimenting on their influencer strategy. Spending $500, receiving $60,000 worth of sales is not common, but it is also not impossible because we've seen brands do that.
So on the micro influencer side of things, often an agency or the brand itself will want to start with a gifting and seeding campaign. Do you recommend that that's how they start, with just sort of finding folks who look like they meet that threshold and just sending out free product?
So the funny thing is, it's very difficult to find someone for a seeding campaign. Very few influencers would have advertised themselves as, hey, I'm willing to receive products from your site. So what we recommend brands to do is to have a strategy. There are basically two high level overarching strategies in the influencer marketing world. One is to increase the reach and brand awareness. And second is to improve sales. So if your goal is to improve sales, then it's sales focused in general, then it makes a lot of sense to work on affiliate partnerships. But so spoiler here is that you wouldn't know which influencer is willing to do affiliate without reaching out to them. A lot of influencers are willing to put in their discount codes and work on an affiliate model because they know that it's a success-based campaign and the brands are very comfortable with it. For brands that are starting out, I would say a combination works well so that they can definitely get more visibility on their brand and more word about their brand products. But at the same time, they can also start getting some sales when the budgets are tight.
Sometimes brands think of influencer marketing as the Kardashians and the megastars, and obviously there is an entire segment of the influencers of that magnitude. And you just described a great strategy, potentially a performance-based strategy for the micro influencers. And how should a brand decide about going after that mid-influencer market, like the folks maybe they've got a reasonably high number of followers. It looks like they might have a pretty good high level of engagement, and it looks like they're spot on with regards to the topics that they cover. Right. But they're bigger than micro influencers. Is there a separate strategy you would recommend if they want to go after those folks?
Yeah, for sure. So I would recommend that if a brand is starting out with influencer marketing, then they should manually reach out to these influencers. They should identify relevant influencers, let's say 10 influencers, create a program, reach out to these influencers and try to connect with them personally. Because the first few influencers are going to be your ambassadors. When you're an early stage brand, you want people who have an influential voice to not only talk about you as a advertisement, but also to include you in their conversations. And there's a very big difference, because in one way you are an ambassador to the brand and you're supporting the brand, but the other way you're just doing a transaction.
Right.
This becomes difficult to scale though. So once you have your initial ambassadors and initial cheerleaders, you want to invest in some kind of program internally, which can allow you to scale your influencer outreach, influencer sourcing. When you want to work with, let's say, 100 influencers every month, and which is not too much, a lot of the brands do this, you need some way to manage it, because otherwise it's going to be very chaotic. This process of finding and managing influencers is a very manual and time-consuming process. Also, it's full of guesswork. So you then would require some way to structure an influencer program internally, but this is when you want to work with more than 10 influencers.
Right, right. For merchants or brands that are used to working with affiliates, and affiliates often include performance-based publisher relationships, and they're starting to apply some of what they've learned in affiliate marketing into the influencer marketing category, which overlaps from a Venn diagram perspective, but it's sort of, there are some best practices that are somewhat unique to the influencer marketing side of performance marketing. How do you recommend that they sort of take what they've learned and what they already know about affiliate marketing and sort of put it to use, but also layer on the uniqueness of influencer marketing and the way in which you deal with influencers differently than you would a publisher?
As you correctly said, right, there's a Venn diagram where there's a lot of overlap between a general affiliate model versus an influencer as an affiliate model. Now, with influencer as an affiliate, you have a big advantage that apart from just the performance, you're also getting the reach of these influencers. So people are going to look at your product, maybe not decide to buy right now, but now they know about it, and it comes from a trusted voice, someone they trust, who would talk about certain categories in a rightful manner. Now, the parallels, when you draw parallels, there are some commonalities here. Commonalities being that brands want to pivot to an affiliate model with influencers so that it's success based, so that the performance can be easily tracked. But at the same time, the difference here is when an affiliate model is, let's say, typically on a blog or on a publisher model, an influencer model is typically on social media. Now, that gives them the higher visibility, which affiliates may not necessarily provide. Also, it gives the consumers some level of affinity to the brand that, hey, oh, this big influencer that I follow is talking about this brand. So even if I don't want to buy the product right now, there is this affinity that is generated with the brand, which affiliates may not necessarily provide.
Yeah, you bring up a really interesting point, right? Because affiliate marketing is typically, click URLs and click based, and whether you're using UTMs or an affiliate tracking system on the back end to compensate your affiliates, a lot of times with social media, there's not even an easy way to put a link in there. Right. So you have to use custom coupon codes. And so, there's a bit of a transition that the marketer needs to make, but also they need to figure out how to introduce that coupon code in such a way that that everybody's happy, right? So that the influencer is also happy to share the coupon code, because they're doing a favor to their to their followers by introducing a discount or something else. So are there some best practices around the use of coupon codes that are different? For example, if you're working with an Instagram influencer versus a TikTok influencer versus a YouTube influencer, or are there very similar strategies with regards to rolling out discount codes and coupon codes?
So Instagram has a big limitation in terms of not allowing links in the URLs. And that's where it becomes very in your face when someone has to write down the coupon code, and then you have to visit the website, use the coupon code, which is counterintuitive. And Instagram has its own way to justify that, because they are now moving to a in-app shopping feature, and they would want brands to use the in-app shopping feature as much as possible. However, YouTube allows you to put in links in your captions, and any other channel that allows you to put links in your caption can have the coupon code embedded within the link itself or with the UTM parameter, so the user does not need to manually input that. We see a lot of clients have less conversions on influencers because of this friction on Instagram, where you have to explicitly include the coupon code. And some brands are very smartly navigated this, and they ask the influencers to say that the influencer was able to get a dedicated coupon code for their followers as part of the collaboration, and the influencer also gets some brownie points here. As you said, if the followers are getting some discount and the influencer says, hey, I work with this brand to get you some discount, and it is only limited to certain time duration, everyone's happy. It's a win-win. The brand gets the conversion tracking, the followers get discounts, and influencers potentially gets paid as part of certain performance.
In some conversations I've had with folks who I guess you could call them influencers, but folks with a big social media footprint, and they haven't jumped into being an influencer. I think there's some fear that because of the new guidelines, both from the Federal Trade Commission in the United States, but also at the platform level, the platforms want to understand if it's branded content, right? And so you often have to check off a checkbox or use a different methodology when you're creating branded content. And I think there's a bit of a fear at the influencer level with regards to going down that path, right? So, either I'll be perceived as selling out, I'm no longer authentic or legitimate, or it might be that they're just concerned that the platforms will reduce their organic reach if once they make the jump to becoming an influencer. So for those issues, either the loss of organic reach to the organic posts, which could obviously have a big negative effect to the influencer overall, or the fact that there's a sort of a regulatory and process overlay that the influencer has to deal with. Sort of, how do you recommend navigating that? And is that a legitimate fear that these folks have with regards to either losing their legitimacy or losing their organic reach if they make the jump into being an influencer?
So you raise a very valid point here about legitimacy. And when we've spoken to influencers, one thing we've realized is that they are actually okay declaring the post as a sponsored post because the followers actually know that is a sponsored post. For all practical purposes, if I am looking at an influencer explicitly promoting, let's say, shoes, and is giving me a discount code to buy it, I know it is a sponsorship. So the influencers actually are okay in many scenarios to talk about this being a sponsored post. I think the change needs to come at the brand level. A lot of brands are cognizant about the fact that regulations exist and they do ask the influencers to explicitly share a sponsored post as a sponsored post. But there are still many brands who, for the sake of being perceived as an organic post, do not enforce the influencers, or maybe sometimes even ask the influencers to not declare it. And I think that is where the change needs to come in. It's because if you are engaging an influencer to talk about your brand, the influencer will most likely do what you ask them to do. And that's where the brand needs to come in and say, hey, here are the policies that we follow. If you have to work with us, you need to declare it. And that way, actually, there is inherent trust between the followers and the brand, because now the followers know that the brand acted in the best faith and actually declared the sponsored post as a sponsored post. So I'm of the belief that the brand should raise their hand and say, going forward, all our associations, they need to declare it as sponsored posts. Otherwise, we'll not go ahead with it.
It's interesting because, despite having an agency that has a creative department, I've sometimes found that the influencers that we're engaging on behalf of clients end up coming up with some really great creative, even though it's very obviously a sponsored post. And then we decide to advise the client to put some budget behind it, right? So in other words, we're actually, in that case, choosing that that's the ad creative we want to run, or instead of something that was perhaps at a higher production value, for that client, because we think the authenticity and the message is spot on for the brand. In those cases, it's interesting because the influencer ends up getting a positive byproduct from that as well, right? They get more visibility because, we're using client marketing dollars to increase the visibility of the influencer. Is that happened a lot? I mean, I know it's happened a few times for us, and I'm just curious if that's happening a lot.
Yeah, we see that a lot. This is basically influencer whitelisting. What happens here is the influencer uploads something, and then the brand would promote the influencer's post on their behalf rather than promoting their own post. And for the followers, so the brand can show this post to the followers that the brand thinks should see it, rather than the influencer's own followers who would naturally see the post. And this way, the brand is also able to drive more visibility of the post to other people who don't follow the influencer. And with this, the influencer gets more reach, they get more followers. And again, it's a win-win for the brand. They don't have to create another piece of content. One thing that I tell a lot of our brands is, hey, if you work with influencers, one of the byproducts is you get amazing, authentic content. Influencers are amazing content creators. You would have spent $10,000, $20,000 booking a studio, doing a photo shoot of your products, just ask the influencers to create that content. They would include such variations. They would use the latest filters that Instagram provides or YouTube provides, etc., and create very engaging content. And there was a piece I was reading yesterday how influencers are threatening the creative agency world because influencers are creating content and brands get, it's just like hitting two goals with one stone, rather than having to engage an agency for one and then influencer for another.
Yeah, despite having a creative team, I don't see it as competitive at all. I mean, we see it as collaborative. Those influencers still need a lot of guidance, right, with regards to
That's true.
content creation, content co-creation, but we also want to not handcuff them with
Right.
a creative brief that's overly specific, right? And so it's
That
finding
is
that
very,
balance in the communications that's critical.
yeah, you've highlighted a very important point here, which is creative freedom. It is very important to give influencers a creative freedom. And a lot of the brands that do this for the first time or the second time, they try to control the creative a lot. They need to realize that influencers are successful content creators because they know what resonates with their followers. It's like a successful DJ. You go to a club and then if the DJ knows how to control the audience, it will have a fun evening. Similarly, you can't apply the same rules or a creative brief across 20 influencers and ask them to create the same kind of content because it just does not work. Every influencer knows the pulse of the followers and they create content which engages their followers. So the brands need to give them the creative freedom to get good results.
Well, it sounds like you built the platform that you've built or had your team build because of the complexity of managing increasing sizes of influencers, from the micro influencers potentially into the mid influencers and more. And so the question becomes sort of sizing, the influencer plan, like, how big should it be? Is it something that it should grow to a certain size? How do you know if it's too big? How do you know if it's too small? Because you might end up with a mix of a lot of micro influencers, a few mid influencers. Maybe if you're lucky, you have a few mega influencers in there as well. So what's the right size?
I don't think there's a right answer to it. Every brand has its own formula of what is the right size for them. But one thing you said, which is like adopting a hybrid approach, typically you would have one or two, or maybe let's say, for example, depending on the number of influencers, a small percentage of influencers that are macro influencers, very big influencers. You would have a very large number of micro influencers and then a long tail of, let's say, nano influencers. And each group serves a specific function. The macro influencers would help spread word about your product. Their offering is reach. They will help you reach thousands and thousands of people in one go. And then the micro influencers will help double down on that message. And the nano influencers can help both drive conversions as well as I said, like act as a long tail and kind of double, triple down on the message that the macro and the micro influencers have shared. This also makes the campaign very affordable because you're most likely spending only on the macro influencer and maybe some micro influencers, but the rest of it are influencers who would give you reach, who would give you conversions, but you're not necessarily spending your marketing dollars on them.
That's great advice. Some of the platforms like Shopify and Magento and others have plugins that allow you to sort of bridge the nano influencer market with the sort of customer referral side of things, right? Where you're basically using your existing customers to refer in other customers. And, a lot of brands like to start that off with, rather than paying out cash, they like to pay out in product. Right. And so, if the person's already buying the product anyway, one might say, well, it's a win-win for everybody because, a $5 credit at the brand level only costs the brand, let's say half of that. Right. Whereas the person receiving that $5 credit as a result of their, spreading the word about the brand to their, being a brand advocate and a brand ambassador, right, they can end up getting free product and potentially at an even more significant discount than that. Have you seen any examples of that working really well?
Yeah, yeah. We've seen a lot of IGC, which is like influencer generated content, kind of being hyperwave right now, especially with Shopify, Magento, and e-commerce D2C ecosystem. And a lot of brands are experimenting with this with TikTok. So what they basically ask on checkout, they would ask that, hey, if you were to upload a TikTok and tag us, you get either a free product or you get some discount on your next order or something like that. This way, they are converting their existing customers, and this is also UGC for all practical purposes, their existing customers or bigger influencers into a content machine and asking them to upload content on TikTok. Olipop, which is one of the drinks, they did this very successfully over the last year or so. They have diverted a lot of their attention from Instagram focused paid influencer marketing to this IGC or UGC focused content creation as a checkout mechanism. That is one. Second one, a lot of our brands, what they are doing is, again, on checkout, they would ask for the Instagram username if the customer is willing to share that. And then behind the scene, they would use email automation solutions like Klaviyo of different sequences based on the Instagram username. And they would check against our system. Like, hey, is this username a micro influencer, a macro influencer, a normal customer? And then they would have an automated sequence through Klaviyo to engage them. So this is how many brands are engaging their existing customers. And how can you find a better influencer than someone who's already buying your product? Like that is a very ideal combination. Like, hey, I have a fan who's buying my product, and if they are willing to talk about me, then no brand would think twice in terms of engaging them.
Right. That's great. And some categories are regulated, obviously, and so you have to be, you would prefer that your influencers not say certain things, right? So certainly, like medical devices and nutraceuticals and vitamins and minerals, right? Yeah, I get you have to sort of be a little bit more careful there than you might in some other categories. Do you have any best practices for folks who are looking to engage in influencer marketing within those regulated categories?
I think it's very important to find the right influencers there, because you don't want to work with a beauty influencer to talk about pharma medicine. It has to be a very curated list of influencers. For example, I would look at the content that the influencers are uploading, look at what kind of hashtags and keywords that are being used, look at what are other brands in the space. So if you are a pharma brand, are there other pharma brands that are already engaging influencers, and use that as a way to source influencers? Obviously, while making sure that the influencer has not spoken about your competitor like yesterday. But at the same time, if it's generally a safe space, if other companies in your peripheral adjacent industries are also working with some influencers and you want to engage them. But I think for certain regulated industries, it is extremely important. We have clients, for example, who want influencers to talk about, let's say, alcohol, and that is a regulated kind of advertisement space, as you might know, where you need to have the followers to be above a certain age range for an influencer to talk about that. At that point, you want to look at the analytics of the influencers. You want to ask them how many of your followers are above the age of 21 or 18, depending on the restrictions in different countries, and then engage them so that your grounds are covered and you're not engaging someone with, let's say, mostly followers who are less than 18 years old. So it becomes very important to source the right influencers, look at the analytics about these influencers, and then have some kind of an agreement with the influencer in terms of on-paper contracts, so that if at all a regulation kind of kicks in, which affects your marketing activities, at least, again, you are legally covered in terms of what collaborations you've done with influencers.
Yeah, it sounds from what you're describing that it might not make sense, for example, for an alcohol marketer or a vitamins and supplements marketer to use the thank you page call to action then, because they haven't had an opportunity to vet that thank you page customer? Or do you feel like because it's an existing customer, there's some latitude involved because there isn't really an exchange of assets necessarily at that point?
Yeah, that's true. There's not always an exchange of assets. In some scenarios, The influencers are supposed to reshare just content that the brand is uploading. In some scenarios, the influencer is supposed to, let's say, show up at an event where the brand is hosting. So the different forms of collaboration, what typically people see online is someone talking about the brand in a social media post. But apart from that, if you actually engage an influencer, they would become your ambassador throughout their day-to-day activities, events. If they're on a podcast, they would just like talk about a podcast about a product that they like, etc. So I think that brands also need to expand their horizon in terms of what is possible in a partnership beyond just a social media shout out.
That's a great point. You used the word collaboration or collabs. Have there been any situations where folks have used your platform or other means that you're aware of to actually pair up two influencers that may not know each other, but they're either in the same category or tangential category, and somebody on the marketing team or somebody on your team basically says, if these two were going to do something as a collab, it'd be a fun collab. Like I see them potentially being able to work together. And have there been situations where you end up introducing the two of them and then saying, listen, would you guys do a collab together, and we'll sponsor it?
So that happens a lot, and that happens in two ways. By the way, it's funny you mentioned collab between influencers, but a lot of times even brands collaborate to sponsor one influencer. So let's say, for example, you want to work with an influencer who's quoting a very high fee, but you really want to work with them because of the followers they have. You go out, you have managers in other companies, and you say, hey, brand two, do you want to come together and work with this influencer so that they would create a video which includes both our products? And that happens as well, and we've helped supported that as well. But on the other side, there's a part of our platform which gives you data about overlapping audiences between two influencers. So if a brand is evaluating, let's say, two different influencers to work with, they can click a button and see how much of their follower base is overlapping. So basis that, the brand can decide if it's a very unique follower base, then they could like do or not do the collab to kind of reach more people. But if it's a very overlapping follower base, then it doesn't make sense to work with two different influencers separately. Might as well just get them together so that the higher overlapping follower base can be reached through a combination of two influencers. So different brands again have different strategies. Where we come in as a company is we have a neutral approach. We provide software. So the software has a lot of data, and you would use our data to work on your strategy, and different companies would do it differently. So in that way, we do not go and connect a brand and say, hey, influencer, these brands want to work with you. The brand would use our software to do that outreach, to do the overlap analysis, to reach out to influencers and ask them to collaborate.
So here's a question that sometimes comes up as you do influencer research, is you may find somebody who you think is a pretty good fit for you. And their contact information may be challenging to find. And, they may or may not respond to a mention or a DM. Is part of what your platform provides is maybe being able to find a secondary conduit to reach somebody who's an influencer or like an email address or something?
So we try and source the contact information through multiple forums. Let's say if it's an active Instagram influencer, there's a possibility that they may have the contact information on the YouTube channel or the TikTok page, etc. So our system would try and look at influencers' other social accounts and see if we can get the contact information. Typically, we recommend our clients to reach out via email. That's more professional. It does not get lost in spam, and mostly brand managers do that. If not, we do help brands kind of figure out what is a strategy that would work for them. But typically, brands would then reach out to influencers via DMs. And there is, again, like if the influencer does not declare their contact information on any social channel, there is no way for any brand to reach out to them. And that is also one of the reasons why many influencers now have understood and they want to put out their contact information, because they want brands to reach out to them. And influencers know that there are solutions like ours that exist, which would help brands with their contact information. So the influencers would typically put in a link in the biography or a contact information in the biography itself.
At what other particular sizes where all of a sudden influencers are starting to get representation, or is it still pretty much the Wild West? Because there used to be that there were some fairly large influencers who didn't have representation, and now we see the flip side where there's some pretty small influencers who already have representation as an agent or management company.
Right.
So how is that evolving currently?
That's true. It is a wild west. I don't think there is a specific structure to it. It depends on how much time the influencer is dedicating to this profession of influencer marketing, of being an influencer in that way, or a creator in that way. A lot of the influencers are part-time, like they have the full-time job. They are working either as an agency, they're working in some brand, they're engineers, chefs, etc. And then outside that, on weekends, on evenings, is when they are doing content creation. And these are hobby influencers, but a lot of the serious influencers, I think, they have some sort of representation. They may or may not have a dedicated manager, but many times they work with a talent management agency as well. And the talent management agency would managing like 100 talents and would bring in some collaboration for the influencer from time to time. But honestly, it's a wild west. There is no one threshold beyond which the influencers are seeking for or representation right now.
Great. So final question. So what has you excited about the next year with regards to the social media platforms or your platform or marketing in general?
So there's a different form of IGC, which is influencer-generated commerce. We spoke about influencer-generated content, but I think 2023 is going to be big on influencer-generated commerce, which is finally where our hypothesis comes to play. And we've been building for this moment, and 2023 is going to be huge because our platform has been shaped to support whenever influencer-generated commerce becomes a thing. We're already seeing early signs of that with the whole affiliate model that we discussed, gifting, product seeding, coupon codes, etc. And now the social media channel themselves are launching in-app shop integrations like shops. There's Facebook store, there's TikTok shopping. Shopify is integrated with YouTube, it's Instagram again directly. So a lot of brands can sell products directly through these social channels. So it's going to be a big year for social commerce, especially for influencer generated commerce. And that is something that keeps us very excited. And we're sitting on the edges of our chair, kind of looking forward to that moment when it happens, because that's where the true power of our platform is going to be unleashed.
Yeah, well, that is super exciting. And with all the changes in the ability to reach people via advertising, making it more difficult, and influencers making it easier, I think that's really bodes well for the evolution of the influencer industry.
That's true. Yeah, you got it right. Yes. We are very excited to see how this whole influencer generated commerce piece is going to shape up. But even beyond that, I think there's a lot of interesting stuff happening in the industry. A lot of brands are going very niche. You're seeing a lot of sustainability focused influencers coming up. We're seeing a lot of diversity focused influencers coming up. So there are different brands trying to kind of engage with different kind of audiences. And that's where these brands would require a robust search engine to identify these influencers. And again, that's where the power of the platform kind of is unleashed. So we have a great momentum. Creator economy is all the buzz. Brands have realized influencer marketing works for them. They are experimenting with more channels. And we're very well positioned to kind of ride on the wave and the growth of the influencer economy.
Well, I'll look forward to continuing to watch your evolution and the evolution of your platform. So thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks a lot, Kevin, for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation. It felt very candid and natural. And I really look forward to other episodes that you roll out with other speakers.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.